So the last work that we did, we were trying to see if we could establish a group flow, non-synchronous, over a large period, a large distance.
Yeah, this is our second paper of this.
Yeah. Okay, and so our research investigated how a socially constructed organizational approach reduces factors like distance and time zones in the creation of new musical content. Ultimately, we were testing whether it's possible to make a network of flow states in different parts of the world to produce a finished song, and we initiated our investigation in Transnational. And so some questions generated from the previous work. How would a constricted timeline change our approach?
So in our previous work, we did this over a long period of time. It was just we all met each other at the 2016 ARP, and that's the first time we'd ever met, and we said, let's make some music together and stuck some things on Dropbox. But our initial approach was very casual. It was just, let's wake up in the morning and see what someone else has put down and then respond to it. And it kind of, took 6 or 7 months of just in our spare time. And it was a really fun project, so we thought we'd do it again, but a bit more.
But in this case, we were thinking, well, what if we constrict it, very much like maybe perhaps a real-life professional recording session where you have a particular date or and times that you're supposed to get a work done. So can we actually write, arrange, record, and mix songs from scratch?
Yeah, and we definitely got to the point where we said, we can't come into the start of this with any ideas. It was just like another little parameter we threw on ourselves.
What role would Sensemaking and flow play in this new constricted timeline?
So if you read the previous paper, which is going to be coming out in the next issue, we started developing a role where organizational communication by Sensemaking, which is a constructionist theory, and how that interacts with flow processes in music. So we're looking at how a constricted timeline changes that relationship.
And by the way, I think they said in the book it was the advertisement was 24 hours. We ended up doing it. Was it 72 or was it?
Oh, the workflow was 24 hours.
Yeah,
so
right,
it was when one of us was sleeping and the other one was working. We had a regular round-the-clock slave shop.
Yeah, and we'll show you that in some charts. So can we be more involved with auxiliary bands? So did you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So last year we used Shane. What were their names?
Randy Westbrook, who teaches improv at our university, jazz improv, and Joel Nelson, who's just a saxophone student there, who's all right.
So last year, one day Wells and I opened up the session, and there were all these saxophone and organ parts, and there's some great stuff there. This time we actually wanted to be more involved in that process, so we actually started to do these sessions.
So how does TNF fit with the literature? TNF is a form of distributed creativity. It takes elements of the flow theory, Csikszentmihalyi and group flow Sawyer, places them into a technological framework. TNF needs a separated sense-making sessions to manage the complex organization involved, and it adopts an improvisational mindset. So there's a lot of, it's a multifaceted event that's going on. Is there another one?
Nope. Find that.
Did
Cool.
you want to tie anything?
No, that's all good. I mean, we're going to really have to burn through this.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about the theory in the paper as well and how this all ties together. Do you want me to?
Sure.
So, conditions-wise, these are the conditions that we came up with after we worked. So, the conditions for how to make transnational flow work. Things like making sure that there's a minimum level of tacit knowledge so that we don't stop or anything like that. Making sure that the further specialization, diversity in specialized areas creates better options. Making sure that there's no concrete boundaries, combinations of space. So it's really thinking of the studio as a conceptual space rather than thinking of it as bricks and mortar. So in our case, we had 3 small studios that we linked together to make one big studio. Kind of like
Network.
yeah. Separation of analytical states from creative states. So thinking about jumping into Skype meetings to analyze what we're doing and then moving into creativity, and overarching pragmatic improvisational philosophy. So we've got to be a little bit flexible because things, when you're doing this stuff long distance, you can have big curveballs thrown at you. Okay, so sense making. What is sense making? Sense making is an active form of discovery. And it's a socially driven problem-solving device. So sometimes we think about cognitive looping, of taking actions or thinking of probability. In this case, it's very much a socially driven problem-solving. It is also an observable phenomenon. So the social constructionist process in which people respond to the unusual, the confusing, unexpected. We kind of have a thesis that music recording is constant sense-making because it's groups of people dealing with things that have no concrete answer. So there is no yes or no, there is a social agreement as to what is the best way forward, which is kind of very much like almost Peircean pragmatism as well. Sense-making is concerned with ideation, so what's really important to me about sense-making and by sense-making theory is that it is concerned with willing ideas into existence. And this is something that we think has a really good parallel with the record-making industry, is you start with nothing, there is nothing. You start with an abstract concept and you will it into a physical form. And that's one thing I've always found really fascinating about the complex negotiation that involves making a record. So there are 7 properties of sense-making. I'll burn through these as quickly as possible because we don't want to waste too much time on the theory. Construction and questioning of identity. When things go wrong, you question your identity. That's when you start the sense-making process. Retrospective analysis. You can't analyze something that hasn't already happened. If you're recording something, you can look back on it and you can analyze where it was good, where it was bad as a social group. Adherence to sensible environments. Weick makes the point that if you put constructive boundaries around your thinking, then you can funnel your thinking. So it's just a constructionist way of looking at understanding the recording environment as a set of limitations, if you deliberately say. Social inquiry, it's a social group. Ongoing examination, so sense-making is a repeating and looping process. And the extradition of mapping and cues, so we use maps and cues to come up with what we're trying to think of. And toward the drive towards plausibility. Now this is the pragmatic heart of everything. It's almost a William James level of pragmatism of when we move to a plausible solution and we stop thinking of things in absolutes. Because I work with a lot of students who want the right answer. And they're thinking that a lot of them become paralyzed with even trying something because they don't think it's going to be right. Whereas if we drive towards a plausible solution and go, let's throw it at the wall and see if it sticks, then you're not even thinking about whether it's right or wrong, you just do it. And that's really what sense-making is all about. It's about groups getting together and mapping things and coming up with plausible ideas to just do. And it's a really great way to think about your mindset as a recording engineer or as a recording group. All right, so the environmental settings, like sense-making in and of itself is not a musical theory, it's organizational, so it deals with changing complexity, organizational meetings, disaster relief, hospitals, orchestral management. There's a couple of really good papers on sense-making orchestral management. And finally, we're starting to explore it as a recording studio theory. So let's look at 4 active stages, because we've gone through some themes, but if you can move this into some sort of an active model, and this has already been done in the hospital environment with Merrin Rutledge, then we can take this sequence out and we can start looking at loops. Now this is what we came up with last year based roughly on Rutledge, which is bracketing, identifying interruptions to flow, mapping, using words and phrases to clarify the meaning of what's been bracketed, plausible solutions, then action, then repeat. And this is what we came up with last time, and that's because everything was very discrete. Our meetings were sense-making meetings, and our playing was just us flowing individually and responding to the other person's musicality. Okay, so new project boundaries, let's see what happens. So in this case, we pulled it down to a 72-hour timeline. We had to write the song together using Skype, no previous ideas allowed. It's just throw it at the wall, see what sticks. What are we capturing? Restricted interactive creation, sense-making in meetings, framing the recording as an organizational exercise, and the song as a form of data. What are our methods? Participant observation and reflection, recording, transcription of Skype data, interaction analysis, song as a form of data, and thematic analysis. Looking at the differences in the more constricted timeline as well, which is something that we were really looking for. How does this shorter timeline and 24-hour workflow affect what we do? I think you were talking about the intense mode. What was it called?
The sprint.
The sprint, yeah. So this was a sprint from start to finish. So research design, 3 of us, we got in there and we just recorded a song. I'm just skip through this because I want to get to the interesting stuff.
And this is a theme material from our first paper.
Yeah. We added some new things in, like portable devices. So while we were Skyping, rather than all be on laptops, some of us were on iPhones, so we could walk around and interact with other musicians. And there was a planning and execution phase. So
was different. That was new.
That was very new. The first one was just kind of casual, throw everything at the wall and just have fun with it. This was like, we've got to get through this. So let's have a look at our network constructed environment. So we had our DAW on Dropbox, and basically record ideas. It just comes onto Dropbox, so someone can open up their computer on the other side of the world, and it works. One of the new things that we used this time was addictive drums. We used MIDI drums to come up with some ideas so that we could chop and move things.
There were several advantages in doing this. One, I'm a little bit more used to playing on electronic drums now because it keeps my neighbors happy. But also, there was a lot of advantage in the songwriting process as well, because when I came up with an idea, because this is MIDI, if for some reason I'm slightly out of time or something, we can easily quantize that data. We can very easily mess with tempos, speed things up, slow things down, see how that might affect ideas as they're coming along. So,
and it's not 4 streams of audio as well, so
right.
it's MIDI, so we just refresh our doors and it will be there.
The sound was surprisingly good too. The samples are good.
Right.
So let's have a look at our plan. Now, what's funny about this plan? So the purple is when we're sleeping. The blue is when we're having meetings at the time. This was saxophone.
We made sure that there was at least the very first day, or before we actually started recording, the day before we started this 72-hour period, we went and met together and made sure the software was working, the MIDI was working, that all the tools were on.
Yes.
So that when we actually started, we wouldn't have to waste any time with fixing things. Or at least the best to our ability. So.
All right. So, and there was a lot more like throwing things at the wall as well. So when Shane was recording saxophone, there's just lines of, we'll show you some of that soon. And when Wells did bass, he recorded it with 2 different basses, slightly different bass lines as a result. Just a few things so we could have more ideas to play with. All right, so let's look at some of the fun stuff. So this is us being introduced to our session organist over here. Did it work? Or is it? Going wrong there. Try a different one.
Have you listened to any of the keyboard stuff yet?
It's pretty killer. Yeah, we were just listening to it when you called. So what was cool is you're tracking, and Wells and I, we're not going to save the session, so if you see a conflicted session, just ignore it. But Wells and I are going to keep randomly opening it up and seeing where you're at, and we're going to screen share that here, so we have it as Shane is recording, Wells and I are spying on him.
So what's really cool about that is we're starting to create parallel processes here that are running at the same time, which I find fascinating. Which means Shane's in the room with the saxophone player coming up with ideas, and Wells and I are looking through the session and checking everything, and they're just popping up quite frequently. It's really exciting to do. Yeah. We've actually got a video of that. Let's see if the introduction thing works. Hang on before you go there. Okay. Yeah, try that one.
But the coast is close.
Did you play the keys?
I did, yes.
I loved it. It sounded great.
Killer job. Love
Thank
it.
You. I don't know, I don't know where you want to put it in the track. I just put stuff down, so just, use whatever, it's like.
Anyway, so he's telling us there that he wasn't really sure what we wanted, and that we wanted it that way. So he was just putting lots of ideas down. We did get involved a little bit more with some of them, so with the saxophone player, and there's a few times where we had to say, okay, when you're putting a lot of ideas down, maybe leave some gaps so we can cut things.
We did, in the organ in particular, we had some specific ideas what we wanted him to do too. So this is
us. So this is talking about the saxophone parts. This is embarrassing for me, so go.
It's kind of a counterpoint to what's happening rhythmically and melodically in that. So I guess it's, these little riffs that are going on. Yeah, stuff like that. You got it.
And finally, this is Wells and I spying on the session.
Okay, so we just reopened the session, and Shane has been recording saxophone down in Kentucky, and Wells and I are just nosing in on it. So obviously he's doing that at the end. Oh yeah, in the bridge section. Let's have a look at what he's put in.
All right.
Hell yeah.
That's cool.
This is like Christmas.
Yeah.
You just reopen this and then there's new stuff.
So next on, look, this is a fun thing, but you know, there's this sort of romanticized thing of what flow is sometimes, and we just wanted to point out that it's not pretty when we flow. But there's a lot going on. It just seems like we're our brain cogs are slowing down. But we'll just play this. It's a good level of embarrassment.
Yeah, some kind of chromatic.
Yeah.
Kind of lick.
It feels all right. It feels fine.
Cool.
Slapping on this. So it's, although we can't play together, because I'm in Australia, so it's physically impossible for us to ever play together. Although we can't play together, we can kind of flow together in the sense that we can throw out ideas really quickly and listen to these ideas. And we were doing short audio loops as well, which helped a lot. Anyway, let's move on, and let's actually have a listen to the finished product so that you're not thinking that there's a bunch of not very clever people trying to figure out how to play guitar for the first time. I like the way it does that. Or just come back on that. So for us, when I'm saying like we're coming up with a lot of these ideas and we're just back and forthing, we started to think of a development of the model of sense-making that we were getting. And there's sort of two things. One was a more fluid interaction of flow and sense-making, whereas the previous one was very discrete. It was very, this was sense-making, this was flow. Now it's all of a sudden we were just flipping into flow and then skipping into sense-making. But the sense-making was more fluid as well, in the sense that rather than being 4 steps, it was now bracketing, mapping, plausible idea, action. Repeat, repeat, until we hit a pragmatic consensus where we all just agreed that this was the operational meaning that we wanted and we moved forward. So without further ado, we'll play sort of from the second verse out. Keep dropping this.
Mr. Hey, I was thinking maybe I could chain my body to a tree. I just need a strong old man to tell me where and when to be afraid. I could jump in a car, I would drive anywhere to see it to the end. I don't know where you are, but it couldn't be far, so just point the way. I would follow the fool to the end of the road. I should have stopped for a minute, stop for a minute, looking around at a room full of clowns. I should have thought
so
Okay.
we're gonna have to flip to conclusions because we're just running out of time a little bit. There's some interesting things that happen now, like some little left turns and musical ideas that we weren't expecting. We're not the funkiest bunch of looking people, but I think we did something pretty funky. Shane's a bit of a dark horse with his bongos and shakers. We discovered. Anyway, so we've managed to create a song under more pressure. It wasn't all perfect. Lyrics were a pain in the ass for us. So in that section where we were talking about the lyrics, that we ended up extending that out, and then that kind of pushed the mix session down a little bit, and then the mix wasn't quite finished by the end of it, so we had to add a little bit of time. So we didn't succeed. But it got to a point with the lyrics where we just started hitting walls, which was just interesting to say when you try and squeeze everything into a thing and then try and come up with lyrics that you feel confident dealing with. If I'm just writing some advertising, I don't care. But if I'm writing something that I care about showing to people, I really want the lyrics to not be terrible. So yeah, it impacted on the mixing time. Mobile technology allowed us to kind of walk around in the studio and talk to the saxophone player as well, and there's this constant sort of free screen thing that's always going on with us. Construct a timeline, more text, throw everything at the wall. Timeline required some careful sense-making meetings at the beginning, and there's the fluidity between the two things. And the really interesting one was the parallel stuff that was going on as well. Because rather than thinking of it as we always have to be in the same space, we don't. If Shane's working with session players over in Eastern Kentucky, then Wells and I, once we've spoken to everyone and got our ideas across, we don't need to sit,
We can multitask in a way that he's doing something, but we're addressing something else in that session as well.
There's an interesting parallel mindset that was going on.
The craziest thing about that was when I was actually done with the session and Skype back with you guys, you were already on board with it. You already had a proposal on how to use that material.
We cut half the stuff already. So he finished the session and most of it was cut and selected already, which was kind of really cool. We made a little time there. But anyway, that's pretty much everything. So in further research, we're kind of trying to get to an EP by the time we get to Boston. That's our plan. So we've already got 2 songs, and we'll just keep running along and keep throwing things at the wall, and hopefully by the end of it have an EP. Once we hit Boston, we're going to spend a little bit of time after Boston playing in a room together, because we've never played in a room together. And what I'm curious about is,
What kind of flow is that?
what if we suck? Anyway, questions?
So Dan, this has been a great presentation. Thank you, lads, and fun again from last time. There's been a few. The idea that one needs a producer has come up a bit at this conference. 1, who was producing, and 2, what do you think would happen if you threw in an external producer?
Well,
would you have met your timeline?
That's a further research idea. I happen to know a producer in Brisbane.
Who was producing? Well, yeah, his list.
We worked.
Well, I
It's a
mixed.
collaboration.
So that, but it was there was no point where we were making decisions where all 3 of us weren't there. I tend to talk more at these bits because I'm kind of knee deep in the theory, in the communication theory. But Wells has got tons of musical ideas, and Shane's has these really kind of cool left field things that just come out all the time as well. Like last year he was recording our Skype sessions, and there was this intertextuality happening where Shane took all of our talking from the Skype sessions, ran them through a tape machine, created tape loops out of them, cut them up, threw them in confetti, retaped them back together, and then brought them back in. So our research actually ended up becoming part of the song. And he's always coming up with these crazy ideas. It's cool.
But I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, we need more. And also, we're talking about transnational flow, and realistically, it's 3 white men who speak English sitting in their rooms who all have the benefit of university degrees. So there's no real diversity that we've started looking into yet. Once we've finished this and we've solidified the models, I want to start looking at more diverse models, and I want to start, seeing if anyone else wants to get on board.
Also, classic.
Not white and a man.
For me, as a teacher, I want to, when we front this stuff up, I want to apply it to a class. my students, and hopefully another university or folks that are interested, we can collaborate and do it that way. I think that would be amazing.
Yeah, well, the idea of university, because the only issue with that from an Australian point of view is asking Australian students to be up at midnight collaborating with people, it's going to be an
different
issue.
time zones and everything. It's all that complex.
But that's the world we live in. I mean, we Australians have to fly 24 hours just to be here. So it'd be great if we could figure out another way to continue interacting with you wonderful people.
The University of Huddersfield, inspiring tomorrow's professionals.